Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is peer. And this verb was suggested by the viewer David. And I want to say a special thank you and possibly ask for forgiveness if I'm not pronouncing your name clearly, but I am so grateful when people suggest different verbs. So David has suggested for us a few verbs that are all going to connect this week. So let's begin to discuss how we use this verb peer. The first way you might encounter this verb means to look keenly or to look at something with difficulty. Okay. So again, our definition here, we're thinking about using our eyes to look at someone or something, and generally, it can be sort of a longer look. So it's not always something that's very short or quick here with this first definition. Now, a second way you might hear that verb peer used means to be just visible. So you either have something coming into view, something maybe emerging slightly. Recently, I heard this verb used by a meteorologist. It had been a very cloudy day, and the person was saying the sun is now peering out, right? It had just become visible. For now, you should know that peer is a regular verb. If you want to make this a progressive verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms peering. The past tense and the participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Now, our base verb, peer, ends in a voiced R sound. This means the ed ending is just going to make a D sound, and we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. So the past tense and the participle form of the verb should sound like this: peered, peered. Now, there are actually a number of phrasal verbs connected to this verb, so we'll focus our discussion today on more meanings and various examples, and I'll try and mention or review some of the verb tenses as we go along. The first phrasal verb you might encounter is to peer about. Generally, when we use this, we're talking about scanning an area, scanning some place with our eyes. Another way some people will talk about it is glancing around. So you're not really fixated on just one thing, right? But your eyes are moving over a space. An example of this might be: he peered about the room with a man who appeared to be a security guard standing nearby. So here's an example of simple past tense. We're talking about a completed action, right? Kind of describing what someone did. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to peer at. Again, this can mean to examine, scan, or even stare at something in a searching way. So I know we've talked about stare before in my verb videos here. And again, the idea is that this is not a quick look. It's going on for a period of time. So an example of this: the James Webb Space Telescope has peered at a distant galaxy to better study and understand it. Okay. I thought this was a great example sentence. It's in the present perfect, so we're talking about something that started in the past, continues into the present, because I think it illustrates that idea of examining something. So this is a huge, really powerful telescope that is used for scientific research purposes, right? So this is not just, oh, what can I see in the sky really quickly, right? Scientists are gathering these images, examining and studying these other galaxies. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to peer in or peer into. This means, again, to glance, look, or stare into something, usually in a rather searching way. An example of this: will you peer into the playroom and see if the kids are playing nicely? Here's an example of a simple future sentence using will. You'll notice in this definition to peer into, glance, that is not a long look. That's a quick one. So here, we're asking someone to take a quick look into a particular area, kind of check on how things are going. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to peer out or peer out of. This means to look closely at something, especially when it cannot be seen easily or maybe it cannot be seen clearly. An example of this: she peered out of her tent to see if the moose had moved on from the campground. Right? So here is someone trying to see, maybe like, is it safe to emerge or to come out of the tent? Right? Maybe there was some kind of warning. Maybe the person saw this wild animal, decided, okay, I need to stay away, keep out of sight. But now this person is looking closely for something that could be a little more challenging to see. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to peer over. This can have a couple different meanings. One way to use it is to talk about glancing, looking, or staring out over the top of something. An example of this: the full moon will peer over the horizon on Monday. Right? So here, this kind of a little different because it's sort of saying the moon here is going to sort of stare out over the horizon, over the top of it. A second way to use peer over means to examine or review something rather closely. An example of this: he peered over his notes in the final minutes before he started the exam. Right? So here, someone is trying to read over, closely review, make sure that maybe they've memorized some information before they take a test. That's another simple past tense sentence. Final phrasal verb you might encounter is to peer through. This can mean to glance, look, or stare through something, and usually this is done in a rather searching way. An example of this: this X-ray vision chip can peer through nearby objects like cardboard boxes and walls. This sentence is using the modal can. We're talking about here with ability, right? So this could be ability in the present tense, most likely. So it has this ability to look through solid objects. It's a little scary, but something we're probably going to encounter more in the future. Now, let's talk about some words that are related to our verb peer. And P-E-E-R can actually be a noun. This noun definition is really not connected to our verb. So most commonly, when you hear the noun peer used, we're talking about another person. And that person might be the same age, they might have the same status or the same ability as another person. An example of this: your peers are facing similar challenges. So if a teacher is talking to a student and shares a sentence like this, she means other students, people who would have the same status. But a sentence like this could also come from a boss or a supervisor, and what they would mean are, or what they would be referring to are people who hold a similar position, right? So your boss, your supervisor, that's not your peer, right? Because their status is different than yours. Now, peer can also be an adjective. You're going to notice same spelling, same pronunciation. When we use this word as an adjective, we're talking about or describing something that has the equal standing with another person. An example of this: the school has been using peer mediators to resolve disputes among students. So a mediator is usually someone who gets others to find common ground, come to a resolution. So here, at this particular school, the person helping with this is not maybe a teacher or a professional, but it's another fellow student. And there are a lot of different programs like this. The idea is there's some relatability. Usually there's a lot of training that goes into this, and you have to find someone who's a bit mature to do it. But I think there have been studies that this, when it's done well, it can be really effective and help people resolve problems. Now, a phrase you might encounter is without peer. It just means unequaled, right? So we're not talking about someone that has equal standing or that has sort of the same status or the same ability. An example of this in a sentence might be, who do you think is a writer without peer? So this is, we're really thinking of kind of the best. Who do we think is just so phenomenal, so much better than any other writers? One last note for us today. I want you to be very careful because there's another word in English that has the exact same pronunciation. So P-I-E-R is a different noun. You might see it or you might hear people use it, but when people are using this word P-I-E-R, peer, it's going to be used as a noun, and most commonly people are using it to talk about a platform that starts on land, so right at the shore, and then kind of leads out into some body of water. Could be an ocean, could be a lake, or something else. And usually this thing is supported on pillars, or there's something so that it's more permanent in nature. Okay, so this thing can be used as a landing stage for boats. Sometimes it's for amusement or enjoyment as well. So you might hear people say, let's go to the pier and fish, right? So they're talking about that structure that connects the land to the water. Thank you all so much for watching today's video, and another special thank you to David for suggesting this verb. I hope you all have a great day.